everybody. And today we are having another session of WeLEAP Aerospace. It is a series from the Empowering Talks. We have been inviting experienced professionals from academia and industry and talking about different topics in aerospace. I founded this nonprofit organization about 2 years ago, and I realized the need of high quality STEM mentorship for women and other minority groups at all stages in their career, may it be undergrad, graduate level, postdoc level, or early career faculty level. And I realized that, of course, there is a leaky pipeline in STEM, and universities do a lot of effort to keep the ratios equal for all the minority and underrepresented groups, especially in undergrad level, and they maintain it up to some extent in graduate level also. But then as you go after the PhD or postdoc, then it becomes really scarce. So one of the reasons I have been studying through based on my own experience and my friends group, networking group, etc., is also the limitations of job opportunities for people coming from different countries other than USA. And so in today's topic, I really wanted to discuss with Maya, Dr. Maya Nasr. She is an alum from MIT, Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. She completed her PhD last year and has joined at Harvard University for a postdoc. She has been involved in several initiatives to voice out her opinion and represent many people who are willing to work in aerospace but have limitations either in terms of citizenship requirements, or it's a very new field in their country, so people don't have enough role models or even opportunities to pursue undergraduate level education there in that particular field. So today we will talk a little bit about Maya's own journey first, like where she come from and how she got interested in aerospace, how was her career path, and then like how she experienced some of these hidden biases in aerospace and what motivated her to become a voice for others. And there are certain initiatives she is involved in. She is also currently working with the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. So we will be talking a little bit more about that and what are all the things aerospace employers are doing worldwide to make this field more accessible. So with that, welcome Maya, and we are so pleased to have you. I believe everybody who will be joining this session, they can benefit a lot either becoming in your situation or being an international student, or even if they are US citizen, they can at least get some sensitivity about this issue. So welcome, and I'm handing over to you, Maya.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction, and kudos for everything you're doing in WeLEAP. It's very important for a lot of topics and a lot of different communities. So I'm really glad to be part of it. Let me share my screen and all right. Well, a brief introduction about myself. I'm originally from Lebanon. I came to the US in 2014 to study aerospace engineering at MIT. I finished my bachelor's through my PhD there. And got a chance to work on multiple projects, which I'll be giving some brief, overview of in the next slides. But currently, I'm doing a postdoctoral research position on the methane SAT project at Harvard. And I'm doing some consulting work with the National Academy of Sciences on their NASA Mission Critical Workforce Infrastructure and Technology Committee. So most of my work in the past and my research areas have been very interdisciplinary. So a lot of my work has been within areas of in situ resource utilization, instrument calibration, characterization, and mission ops, in addition to topics of tech strategy, engineering systems, and space law policy and ethics. So my PhD itself was a mix of all, and my current work is generally trying to combine these different perspectives. I'm also a huge advocate for space accessibility, and specifically when it comes to nationality-based discrimination opportunities. So I'll have a few slides within this presentation where I'll talk about some of my work in that regard. But most of my, talking about my PhD work, it was really focused on one of the instruments on the Mars 2020 rover. This instrument is this gold box called MOXIE, which is the first time we demonstrated the technology of using space resources, specifically in this case, using the Martian atmosphere to produce oxygen on the surface of Mars. So this was a core part of my, work at MIT. But it also prompted two other areas of work within my research. One, studying the NASA's planetary program overall and the innovation challenges for such technologies to be invested in and to propagate throughout missions. And the second part is really focused on our responsibility as engineers, enabling such technologies to make sure it's done within a policy framework that's sustainable and equitable to benefit all people around the world. And currently with my PhD, post my PhD work, I really focused on the methane sat project, really applying space technologies to study climate change. So our project really focuses on tracking methane emissions globally from oil and gas and from agriculture and other sources. My specific work is really focused on our in-orbit calibrations. So specifically using the moon in order to calibrate our spectrometers and doing some of our mission operations planning, in addition to some machine learning work for our data analysis. So with this in mind of my current work, I want to take you a bit on the journey of, how I got here, my background, etc. So I grew up in this village in Lebanon, in the Shuf area. I absolutely love our community. It was such an incredible, a very family structured, everyone, community-based kind of growing up. And I really appreciated that part of me and my culture as I went to the US, as I went further. But the main kind of thing that always grew up with me in Lebanon was kind of looking at the skies in a village and being able to see all the stars, being able to, look at the skies and wonder where we're coming from, what our universe, how did our universe start, all these types of big existential questions. And a few years ago, I went back to Lebanon and I found my a journal from when I was really young. And it really was heartwarming for me to read my thoughts on space when I was 10 years old, basically being this constant fascination between the discovery of space and being able to become an astronaut and, go and explore space. And that for me has been a core part of my identity since I was a really young kid, because of this fascination with the big questions about our universe and about who we are as people in it. Fast forward throughout my school, since elementary school to my high school, I was in Shuf National College in the Ba'lin area in Lebanon. And in my school, it was really challenging to be able to see people who have gone through different tracks and paths that were very different than what the community is doing, especially as women. It was really hard to see anyone who studied anything related to space, let alone women being integrated within this STEM and engineering community. So for me, that was something that was always missing, and I didn't find an easy way at all to be able to get integrated in. That said, one day I was walking around school and I saw a flyer that said, do you want to apply to the US? Here's, two quotes from two students. One was at MIT and one was at Harvard, and this could be your opportunity. So I was like, all right, we're going to take this flyer and go back home. And I went home, I talked to my parents. I was like, hey, so mom and dad, how do you feel about me going to the US to continue my studies in college? And everyone started with started really as a joke that it's not gonna, what are the chances that it's gonna happen? But my parents were incredibly supportive, very different than what, the community standards, I guess, are, especially in, mountain village kind of community where more patriarchal standards are what's common. My parents were very supportive and driving me to this opportunity in order to apply to the US. And fast forward years later, I got accepted to MIT. This was a photo from my undergraduate graduation. And I'm very grateful for Amidis. It's an organization in Lebanon that helped in, navigating the process of applying to the US as someone from Lebanon who's never gone through the process. So that was a huge, huge part in my career. And that was kind of the email that changed everything in my track on Pi Day in 2014 when I got admitted to MIT. And it kind of set me in reality that this is happening. I'm going to be able to study aerospace engineering. I'm going to be able to move to the US. Since throughout my high school, when everything was happening in my applications, the Mars Curiosity rover, which I'm showing a photo of over here, landed on the surface of Mars. So on top of the excitement that I always had about space, being able to see such a momentous event happening and being able to watch it and watch everyone on mission control, screaming and jumping and have the excitement by just watching the video was incomparable. There's not a lot of, things that I could watch it make me feel the same way. And really specifically, one of my main motivations to apply in space was this person over here. His name is Dr. Charles Lashy. He was originally also grew up in a village in Lebanon, and he made it to become the director of NASA JPL and leading all these missions to Mars. And that was for me, a moment of looking around, being like, someone from, a place similar to mine was able to make it all the way there. And that really motivated me to be able to, apply and see that there's a possibility of it happening. Even if it's very small, there's still a chance. And years later, I was able to actually get my first job at NASA JPL, and I was working specifically under the supervision of Dr. Charles Lashy, and that was a very closing the circle moment for me. And last week, I was at Caltech and was able to see him again, and it was a very kind of, for me, a moment in my career where I can look back at me in high school, looking at these videos, and being able to be part of something right now here in the US. And at that point, most of my work was focused on the Cassini mission activity on Titan. So Titan is Saturn's largest moon. It's very interesting because it has a very similar atmosphere to here on Earth. And it has a cycle similar to the water cycle that we observe here on Earth, but it is actually made of methane. So there's a lot of bodies of liquid on the surface of Titan that are made of liquid ethane and methane. And throughout the Cassini mission, we were able to see a lot of these lakes that had some raised rims. And we wanted to understand what was the reason of these rims to form from a geology perspective and how we could use our data in order to fully understand it. So a lot of my work was focused on taking the data that we have from our synthetic aperture radar that gives us morphological information about different heights and what's going on the surface of Mars, and combining it with spectral imagery and spectral details to understand the different components and composition of what we're seeing on the surface. So that was a big part of me being involved in research, being able to be involved in active missions as an undergraduate. That helped me a lot processing forward. And I was able to do that through involvements in an academic structure through academia to be able to get access to a lot of these projects. And this is just an overview of some of how this data looked and how we did the overlay of our analysis. And then throughout that as well, here at MIT, I had just started getting involved in 2015 with our Mars Oxygen ISRU experiment. So that was for me kind of my official baby project all throughout undergrad since the end of my PhD. And the main idea behind MOXIE was that sending things to space is expensive, but specifically sending things to Mars and propellant to Mars is very expensive. So if we want to have a crew that's sent to Mars and we want to launch them off the surface of Mars, for about 6 people, we would need about 40 metric tons of propellant, a big portion of which would have to be oxygen. And that would mean we would have to launch about 450 tons to low Earth orbit to allow that. So it's incredibly expensive when we talk about sending people to Mars and being able to bring them back home. This is over $1 billion just to get the crew off the surface of Mars. So it really makes more economic sense to be able to go to a place and make use of the resources in the place that we go to instead of bringing it all with us from Earth. And this is the idea of ISRU, in-situ resource utilization. This is the concept of kind of living off the land, using the resources that we have. And on Mars, we have multiple options. So we've got the CO2 in the atmosphere. We've got, excuse me. We've got water ice, and we've got hydrated regolith. So it really makes a lot of economic sense to be able to use these resources that we have. And this technology has been, talked about for years, but it has never been proven until the Mars 2020 rover mission, which had a number of mission objectives, one being seeking signs of past life. This is where we landed on a river delta to understand the deposits that could happen in the past that could have signs of past life, setting aside caches of sample for future missions. So this is prep for Mars sample return that's happening in the future. And lastly, preparing for human exploration of Mars. And this is where our project came to play. So our project stands in the front right side belly of the Mars 2020 rover. It produces oxygen from the atmospheric CO2. And its main requirements was producing that at about 6 grams per hour at greater than 98% purity. So since our landing on the surface of Mars, we were able to do a lot of activities. But a lot of part of my work when I started on the project was preparing for our instrument to go to Mars. There's a lot of instrument calibrations and characterizations that were needed specifically for our sensors, because a lot of our components were made for Earth-like operating conditions. So we didn't necessarily know how they would behave under Martian, temperatures, pressures, under the composition of gases that they're going to be accustomed to. So I worked a lot on instrument testing and vacuum chambers under these conditions to prepare us for understanding our data from Mars. And in addition to that, since we landed on Mars, I had the really unique opportunity to be our science payload downlink lead, which means I'm basically responsible for taking all the data that we get from our rover, from our instrument, analyze it, report on it, and make sure we, are operating the way we want to operate, within trip any faults. And one of the most exciting, moments in that sense was on April 20, 2021. That was the first time we produced our first oxygen. That happened a few days after the Mars Ingenuity helicopter did its first flight, which I hope some of you were able to see its photos and videos. But unfortunately, oxygen production is not very photogenic. So the only thing we can show is our plot of oxygen being produced. But that was a very, important moment for us. And this is just a screenshot of our team at the time, clustered virtually. It was during the pandemic to celebrate the moment we received the data. Durgesh, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, so I have a question. So this sounds a very interesting, insightful, and very challenging project. Of course it is. And NASA is kind of leading this effort. MIT is one of the leader universities. Are there other collaborators also from across the nation? Are you aware of them? Could you share?
Yeah. So for this specific project, we worked with different companies that manufacture different parts of our project. So Oxyon did our cells, our solid oxide electrolysis cells, and they're actually working now with NASA on the larger version of things that would have applications on the moon and on Mars, and does co-electrolysis of the atmosphere, but also any water that exists. So that was one collaborator. JPL was the main collaborator, and MIT, and specifically MIT Haystack Observatory, were the two main, collaborations with it from an academic side. That said, for anyone, listening in, there's a lot of NASA projects that are in collaboration with academia, especially PI-led projects. We saw Psyche, for example, that just launched, which was a very exciting moment. It's in collaboration with Arizona State University. There's a number of missions that happen with Caltech. So there's a lot of different opportunities and similar projects that are done in collaboration with academic institutions. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. And just to give you like a summary of what we've done so far, Since our landing on Mars, we've done 16 oxygen runs, produced about 6 grams per hour of oxygen. This is about what a small tree would make and how much a dog would breathe. But more recently, we actually pushed the envelope further to produce 12 grams per hour of oxygen over a sustained period. And a big part of our success criteria was being able to operate under all Martian environmental conditions, under all atmospheric density seasons. And this is a big part of what we try to prove within our operating cycles spread out throughout these seasonal atmospheric densities. And we're very excited. Last month, we were picked by Time as one of the best inventions of 2023, breathing Martian air, NASA's MOXIE. So that was a very exciting moment for us at wrapping up our mission after years on Mars, to be able to really have proven this technology and taken it further to be ready for future human exploration of Mars. But for me, a big part of what this project, on a personal level, was important is I remember when I first got to MIT, we worked on these rocket bottle competition. And I remember at that point, we named a rocket onto Mars because there's like this, excitement for us high schoolers coming to MIT, being able to work on something. And we worked that year as well on tiny Lego rovers and being able to, understand how these things work. So to be able to get the opportunity to be involved in a project that actually went to Mars, was part of a real rover, was a big moment for me on a personal level to, again, look back at what I was hoping for to get when I was applying in high school to what actually happened at the end of my MIT experience. So that was very meaningful on a personal level. But a big part of what I realized over the times in my work is I'm very interdisciplinary, and I realized over time there's a lot of topics and problems that we have in aerospace that we cannot just tackle from an engineering perspective. We cannot just be scientists, we cannot just be engineers in order to tackle them. So this involved a lot of challenges that I had being international in the US. This involved a lot of problems that we saw in terms of space militarization. We saw a lot of things relating to space resource use and how it's being tackled. So one really important organization that I was able to join was the Space Generation Advisory Council, SGAC. And that was a big part of my experience over the last 3 to 4 years. Specifically, in SGAC, I'm leading our space law and policy project group, and this was a very kind of shift of what I'm used to in terms of topics. What I'm exposed to, being in an engineering school at MIT, didn't necessarily have all the exposure to topics that are legal, to topics that are political. But I realized over time how much impact we can make, how much our understanding coming from an engineering background to topics of space law and policy could have a change within the atmosphere of what we're seeing right now in the space sector. So I've worked on a lot of topics relating to Earth observation data and human rights, topics about space disarmament and how we can ensure peaceful use of outer space, topics relating to benefit sharing of space resource use. So this was a really good shift and an incredible community globally to be surrounded by when it comes to areas of law and policy. Durgesh?
Yeah, so Maya, I have a question about how can somebody join SGAC? Are there some eligibility requirements for that?
Yeah, so anyone can join if they're between 18 and 35. SGAC is a global organization that represents the young voices in the space sector. We have a lot of different pieces of it. So space law and policy is only one of the groups. There's space exploration, there's humans in aerospace, there's space medicine, etc. So there's a lot of opportunities. Each one of the project groups has a different cycle of accepting people. For space law and policy, we actually are going to be launching our onboarding for the next year and the next month or two. So you'll be able to see the links on our website and SGAC if you just Google SGAC space law and policy. And we will be trying to advertise it to different platforms. So we will definitely send that link to WeLEAP and be able to also spread it to anyone interested. But it is open for everyone, and we're aiming really you don't have to be from a policy or legal background to be part of it. A big part of what we want is to give those skills and capabilities and topics and make people think about these areas of in the space sector that are not necessarily thought of in engineering schools, science schools as much, and vice versa in other places. You know, we've got a lot of policy folks who've never worked in space but are interested, that are coming from a different background. So it's just a really good, diverse backgrounds group that collaborates on a lot of these really interesting questions in the space sector.
That's
But
great.
yeah, but this project really encouraged me to also incorporate similar aspects of this work within my own PhD. Again, I mentioned this idea that we as engineers enabling technologies such as space resource use have and hold a responsibility to ensure it's done in a way that's equitable and sustainable. And a big part of my push behind this work is this constant question: is when we go to space, who will overall be benefiting from space exploration? When we take this next giant leap into space, how can we make it in a way that benefits all people around the world, not make rich countries richer and poor countries poorer? So that is a big motivation in all of my, work and advocacy, and also my PhD research on this aspect of the work. Especially because there's a huge current colonial mindset when it comes to the space discourse. So we always talk about this unrestrained first come, first claim when it comes to space. You can go, put a flag on it and it's yours. This kind of idea that just because we can and we have the technology, we have the right to claim anything without regardless of past, present, and future claims of other people or of the environment. So that kind of mentality is what drove me to try to find a group of engineers, a group of scientists who care about really making sure we don't end up that way, this kind of tragedy of the commons that we have been seeing in low Earth orbit, and we are going to be carrying it with us into further space. And a big part of my experience within this space world and space sector, whether it's from a scientific point of view, legal point of view, and that drove a lot of my work about benefit sharing and about making sure just because you're from one country, you are treated similarly to the others when it comes to space access, is the fact that unfortunately I am one of the I'm Lebanese. I'm which is one of the countries that's on NASA's designated country list. So as many of you are aware, working in the space sector in the US is very difficult as an international, but there's a further layer of complexity that comes for certain passports for certain countries being part of designated countries. And even if these people like myself have nothing to do with any of the political aspect of where you're from, you are currently just treated based on what your passport is. There's no specific nuances for your capabilities, and that has a huge drawback to the US itself, training a lot of these students and people to not be able to work and the country itself. So that prompted a lot of my advocacy, because it had a lot of my restraints and restrictions in my projects, whether it's the MOXIE projects or others. And I'm happy to share more about that in the Q&A as well as we discuss it further. But this also started to prompt, I started in undergrad. I always felt this discrimination constantly, but I didn't feel empowered enough to talk because I was mostly surrounded by people who were from the US. The percentage of internationals in aerospace studying in my classes were very, very, very little. So I didn't feel that's big enough of a problem that I can make an impact in. Fast forward a few years later, when I started grad school, our portion of international students was almost 50-50. And at that point, you could realize that, hey, this is a problem that everyone's facing, not just me. And at that point, I was able to become a part of the Graduate Aeronautics and Astronautics Association at MIT, GA-Cube. And I held there the position of international chair. So I was representing the international students in our department, and I felt that position empowered me a bit to be like, I need to speak on behalf of different people passing through the struggles, and I have a specific platform throughout this position to start talking about it. And this coincided, unfortunately, with everything that was going on with the previous administration's policies on visas, on being able to limit work abilities for internationals after graduation in all fields, not just in aerospace. but also what happened about deporting possibly students at the time during the pandemic with virtual classes. There was a lot of different attacks from so many different policies happening all at once to international students in all different fields. And this prompted me to kind of, I think things were building up year over year and over year. And I realized at that point that we want to be able to talk about these problems. We want to be able to look at websites that say we are an equal opportunity employer, that we employ people without regard to their national origin and citizenship, who right away under this claim specifically say that we will not accept applications from people of designated countries. So this kind of push and this kind of contradiction that we're seeing all across, to be able to highlight it, put further, light, put it further under the spotlight for people to talk about it. And this is what drove me to a lot of advocacy work. So I was able to use my platform, work with different news outlets, work with different organizations in order to use my own story as someone from Lebanon, as someone under these restrictions, as someone who has been trained throughout all my degrees at MIT and not able to access any of the opportunities in any of the jobs. So trying to use this to voice and represent a lot of people. And that for me helped me a lot, because we during the pandemic were able through different legal work with MIT, Harvard, and a lot of other universities across the US reverse the ICE rule about possibly deporting international students, and we're able to make some change there. And that really gave me motivation that, hey, we're able to do that. Maybe, we can continue doing that in other areas. We can encourage, different people to make changes there. And this drove me to my other project that I started in 2020 as well, which is the Humanity United with MIT Arts and Nanotechnology in Space project. If we look in the areas of space, international collaboration and international efforts are very, very limited. We see few examples like the ISS, but it's also really few number of countries that have been part of it. So one of the only examples that kind of represented our humanity was the Golden Record back in the day. And what I was trying to think of at that time is kind of a symbolic way to do a similar message, but at our time. So the Humans Project asked people all around the world to submit in their own native language what does space mean to them and to humanity. And we were able to represent all regions globally, 80 countries and over 64 unique languages that have never been in space. And this is our wafer. I'm holding it here in front of the MIT Nano building. We're able to nano etch all of these voices and all of these messages. And this is our superstar team that made it really happen from different aspects of the project. So if you zoom in, you could see the different messages and the different languages representing all people globally about what space mean to them. And you're able to nano etch all of the waveforms of the voices. And we sent this wafer to the International Space Station last year in May. And not only were we able to show the actual wafer, we were able to play a mesh of all the voices. So people were able to hear these languages have never been to space, hear them for the first time on the ISS. And we were hoping this symbolic effort will, encourage more people to see themselves being able to access space somehow. And we are launching later this spring a smaller version of our project on the MAP rover that's going to the surface of the moon. So with that, I'm hoping that, this opens up a lot of areas for questions and Q&A so we can discuss, but I will end my presentation here. Thank you for listening.